Hey, what's up, you awesome dudes? Crazy here, back in Borderlands 3, and today I'm going to show you a really awesome and quite overpowered build for endgame flak. In fact, this is probably the strongest build I've used so far. It absolutely shreds bosses, especially the big ones, and yes, it is more than amazing on both Mayhem 2 as well as 3. I've been doing this for the past day or so, and it's absolutely amazing. It's wrecking everything, as you can see right now on the screen, and it's also super fun. I mean, this is one of the funnest builds I actually played around with. So of course, if you watched any of my previous videos, I am using one of the guns from a very end game encounter. So yeah, spoilers alert. If you don't want to get spoiled, there's going to be some fights happening in this video that are going to be truly end game. So if you don't want to see that, then stay back. But in this case, I'm using, of course, King's Call. This is a level 50 that I got, and it's actually very powerful. It comes with some really awesome stats, and I managed to get it with a 10% critical hit damage on top of its bonuses. So let's go over the actual build and what makes it so overpowered. And actually, let me just start with the weapon itself, because the bonus over here is extremely important. The one that reads critical hits return 3 bullets to your magazine and also ricochet 3 bullets at the nearest enemy. In this case, if you're fighting bosses, all of the bullets will all ricochet to the boss itself, and there is where all the damage comes from. So the more hits, the more critical hits that you do, the more bullets you get, the more ricochet bullets you can do. So it's pretty simple, but you can actually make that even better, because Flak has some really awesome passives over here that further buff that beyond. So let's go over the actual build itself, and here are all the skills that I'm currently using. I'm using the Hunter tree as well as the Stalker tree, but of course the Hunter is where most of my damage is and where most of my points are invested in. So let's just go over the Hunter tree first, because this has some really important skills over here that you really need if you want to make this build successful. So the first one is Leave No Trace. This is what makes this build so overpowered, because if you read it, when Flak scores a critical hit, there is a chance for 1 ammo to be added to your magazine, and in 3 out of 3 it has a chance of 36%, and this is of course stacking on top of what this gun already has. King's Call already has something like that baked into it, so it's like a double bonus that always keeps you refilled, and you won't have to reload as much as you need if you didn't have this perk. So again, this is very important. This is what makes this build in the starting stages so overpowered. From this point on, it's all about damage, stacking damage abilities. So I went for Interplanetary Stalker. This gives me a stack of 10% damage increase each time I do some damage, and because I'm doing damage with such a high rate, I can get this buff really fast. So that is like a 50% easy damage to go over. Another one that I went for is of course head count. This is very important because I'm also using Fade Away, and Fade Away is where most of my crits come from, and I kind of want to buff that a little bit. So whenever Flak scores a critical hit, there is a chance their action skill cooldown is reduced. So every crit I do has a 30% chance to slash off 2 seconds of that timer, and because I'm doing constant crits, I'm pretty much spamming this Fade Away just because of this ability over here. I also went with this passive, Hunter's Eye, but I didn't fully max it out because there were more important skills over here that I really wanted. So this increases bonuses when fighting different types of enemies like humans, robots, beasts, but bosses, unless you get a special item, are not considered either human, robots or beasts. So I kinda only put this here so I can further progress later into the tree, but it's also useful if you're fighting ads all the time. Another one that is extremely good is Two Fang, and what this does is it adds a chance to fire an extra projectile per shot, and that chance is 25% at maximum. So whenever I'm shooting all of those bullets, I have a very high chance of also shooting extra projectiles. So there is where all the spam comes from. All of these 3 combined are just melting, and they are just buffing each other over and over again. From this point on, we have the most dangerous game, and this is just an overall amazing passive. Of course, you don't absolutely need this. You can definitely go for something else. Let's say you want more reload speed or something else, can definitely go with that. But let's say for example you're doing some endgame activities where you will fight badass or strong enemies, and in this case this will greatly benefit that because you will receive a huge gun damage bonus to that as well as critical damage. So whenever you're fighting badass or stronger enemies, you gain an increased critical damage, gun damage, handling for a very long time, 120 seconds, and the bonuses are pretty wild, like 33%, 13%, 40% to handling, duration is pretty high, and also rewards cash on kill, but that is not really important. From this point on, there's two very important bonuses over here that I went for. In this case, Galactic Shadow, which straight out buffs your critical hit damage by 15%. There's also Mega Vor, which further increases critical hit chance by 20% for even more crits, and I think to get that last one over there you will need this one, Grim Harvest, but this is also mandatory. Grim Harvest increases gun damage and action skill damage by another 15% and 20% respectively. I didn't use any of the active abilities, by the way, just because none of them straight out buff damage for the build that I am using. Now let's go over the Stalker build, as this is the complementary build over here, even though this is almost into the end over here. So some of the very important skills that I got over here are Furious Attacks. After shooting an enemy, Flak gains a stack of Furious Stacks, which increases gun damage and handling, and it's 2% per stack for gun damage and 4.8% for handling. So that is again a straight out very good buff to your overall damage. Now the Overclocked is something that it's not 100% mandatory, you can go for something else as well. It just increases your fire rate after reloading, but you're not reloading that much unless you're not hitting critical hits, so it's a matter of preference over here. You can go for more HP regen if you want to, but then of course I went in with Turn, Tail and Turn, and this increases gun damage and fire rate. Again, some really awesome stats. I also spec'd in Lick the Wounds. I mean, it's just there, I needed the points anyway, and it's so useful to have my pet revive me when I'm in danger. And the final and extremely important passive that I went with was the Fast and the Furious, and what this does is that when you're over half HP, it greatly increases both gun damage and movement speed, 25% and 10% respectively. And from this point on, as I was saying, I picked this pet over here, the Gunslinger Jabber, because it increases my movement speed by another 5%, but critical hit damage by another 5% as well, and nothing else from what I was able to tell over here increases that, so this was the best choice, even though the increase was just marginal. But the more important ones are for your fadeaway ability, and here is where most of your damage comes from. I have used Gorillas in the Mist as well as the Unblinking Eye, and the first one, what it does is that even though it reduces the amount of critical hit damage that you do during this, it also buffs it so that you can stay in it for much longer. So what this means is that you can stay in it for about 8 seconds, and you can just stay inside of that for 8 seconds, continuously do crit damage, and this in itself is where all of the damage comes from. This will greatly benefit that passive from the gun, so that you get that insane amount of damage from those ricochet bullets, and the fact that you get all of the bullets back into your magazine. So that is why this is important. And I also went with Unblinking Eye because this just gives you a 75% critical hit damage per hit, and that just ensures that you're doing constant crits over and over again. As far as my other items go, it doesn't really matter, honestly. You can pretty much go with anything as long as you have these skills and this weapon over here, but I'm going to go over a few weapons here that I believe greatly increase your damage, and I'm going to go first over this shield upgrade called Health Rerouter, and what this does is that when fully charged, the next shot drains 50% of your shield, but it deals an additional 120% bonus amp damage and returns it as health. And I definitely noticed a huge spike in damage just by having this over here, and yeah, it's just an amazing overall item to have. Otherwise, I'm still hunting for a good relic. This relic is just something that I got randomly. In this case, this one gives me 40% magazine size, and this lets me have 8 bullets, which I found really awesome and definitely very helpful. So if you can find something that gives you bonus magazine size, it's definitely going to be useful, but also go for something that increases your weapon damage. Now, other weapons that I definitely recommend with this build are Lucian's Call. I cannot remember where I got this one, but I believe this is a boss drop, and this one is also absolutely broken. This destroys everything, and especially when you're doing the Circle of Slaughter, it's absolutely crazy. The amount of damage that you're doing with this thing is just insane. You can just destroy all of the enemies, you have a huge amount of ammo to go, and it just regenerates again and again, and that's because it has a similar bonus over here as King's Call, as in critical hits return 2 bullets this time to your magazine, but also ricochet 2 bullets at the nearest enemies, and it just becomes insane when you use these, and that is it. That is all there is to this build. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, tell me what other favorite builds do you have for Flag or for literally any other character in the game. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would definitely be super appreciated. Also, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.